Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here today on this Total Wellness Tuesday episode, where we are going to be going over 7 lifestyle factors that have been proven to lower your immunity. And not only do they lower your immunity, they also create an abundance of inflammation in the body. So when we're talking about overall health, what we want to focus on is what are the things in life that decrease inflammation or balance inflammation, and what are those things that increase inflammation? And remember, I've said this before, but inflammation is not a disease itself, and inflammation is not a root cause. So for a lot of people out there talking about we need to reduce inflammation, we do, but we don't want to do that necessarily through pharmaceutical drugs, and we don't want to do that through nutritional supplements. Now, we can do those things as needed. So in an acute-based circumstance, a lot of people, and obviously the world right now, are talking about how can we reduce overexpression of inflammation in the body, especially with something like COVID-19. But then there's the other side of it. How can we reduce inflammation for everyday things such as allergies or asthma or joint pain? So all of these things do matter, but we only want to use those pharmaceuticals in a time of acute-based need. That means life-threatening situations. And then we only want to use the supplements in the times of, okay, we're going to symptomatically relieve a lot of these issues due to inflammation while working on a lot of the root cause-based issues. So today I want to go through 7 of those potential root cause issues for why your body's creating more inflammation and at the same time why it's decreasing the immune system. Because a lot of the time when you increase inflammation in your body, you're actually decreasing your immune system. And we'll go over that in the different expressions today. There are many more than this, but 7 of the most common. So that's why I wanted to go over topics today that were applicable for a lot of people and things that might actually be more in effect during this lockdown period of time. So let's go over that. Again, this can be used any time of the year, and I'm sure it kind of creeps into all of our lives from time to time. But let's go over those. Let's really look at what is the 1 or 2 that we can do a better job of right now. Maybe we can't control all 7, or maybe we don't want to work on all 7 right now, but let's at least pick out 1 or 2 that we can dramatically reduce in order to begin to empty that rain barrel. So for those people just not basically as familiar with white blood cells, we'll call that our immune system. Okay, there are many types of white blood cells. There are many types of immune cells in general. We could be talking about cytokine expression. We could talk about phagocytes. We could talk about T helper cells. We could talk about natural killer cells, interleukins, leukotrienes. You don't need to get that in depth. What we need to know is this, is that when there is a response needed by the body in order to remove a pathogen, a virus, a yeast, a microbe, a bacteria, something that is essentially an invader to the body, foreign to the body, okay? When there is that thing going on in the body, well, white blood cells, and not just white blood cells, the other immune cells I was just speaking about, they begin to ramp up. Now, when they ramp up, their job is to go after whatever that foreign invader or foreign body is. When they are doing this, it causes inflammation. That's why inflammation, not only is it not a root cause, it's not even really an imbalance. The imbalance is whatever is causing the inflammation in the first place, right? So what's the foreign invader? That's what we always talk about. Is it food-based issues? Is it gut-based issues? Is it yeast overgrowth? Is it H. pylori? Is it parasites? Is it heavy metals? Is it environmental toxins, plastics, etc.? It could be so many different things. Triclosan from your toothpaste, right? It could be fluoride. It could be all sorts of different things that we might be taking in. But here's the thing. Our immune system, it really isn't messing up. Now, it might be an overexpression. That's absolutely possible, leading to autoimmune issues, and we'll be talking about that. But for sure, the immune system gets ramped up when it needs to, right? And then that creates inflammation. The inflammation is the actual process taking place of the white blood cells attacking whatever that foreign invader is. So hopefully, and when the immune system is working well, it destroys the virus or the bacteria or whatever the pathogen is. And then when that happens and the invader has been neutralized, then the inflammation begins to subside. Think about even an injury. Let's say you get hit in your leg and your leg swells up. You get a bump. Okay, well, that's inflammation. It's the body repairing all of those damaged cells and all the contents of the cells that spilled out. And the body will move that through the lymphatic system and it will move through the liver and you'll process it and it'll be out of the body. Maybe it takes 2-3 days, right? So all of these things are common signs of inflammation. A bee sting, that's a common sign of inflammation. Now, it's healthy inflammation. The body's having a histamine-based response. It's having a specific response to that particular injury. In this case, a bee sting, right? And the venom or whatever it is in that particular sting causes the immune-based reaction. Okay, so we know that inflammation is natural in the body, but what we don't really talk about enough is when there is greater amounts of inflammation, there can be immune suppression as well from things that are more unnatural. So now let's talk about those factors. The first factor is this. When we eat too much processed carbohydrates and processed sugar, those are things that are basically flour-like in essence, or just straight sugar. So think about taking flour or grain or bread, anything that you can literally rub in your hand and it turns to dust. That's typically what I say. Crackers or chips, they just break down very, very easily. Now the problem is, when you take in all of this sugar, think of it as putting your immune system, your white blood cells, in a little bit of a coma. It kind of puts them to sleep. And when this happens, it allows the viruses or pathogens or whatever it might be to replicate or to basically settle into a greater degree. And it causes even far more repercussions in the future. So that inflammation can lead to insulin-based desensitivity, which can also create greater inflammation in the future. So all of these things do affect the immune system, and it affects it from a chronic-based standpoint as well. We'll be talking about that much more today in the show, so stay tuned for that as well. So too much sugar is absolutely one of the first ones. Of course, candy and straight sugar or beverages with sugar in them are culprits, but a lot of people don't think of the crackers or the chips or the flours that break down and make it pretty easy for the body to spike blood sugar levels and suppress inflammation. Okay, so we'll get into how that does that with insulin in just a moment, and I also recorded a video on this as well if you want to get deeper into how sugar or blood sugar dysregulation affects the immune system. Number 2 is this. When you are holding extra weight, extra body fat, it actually lowers the body's ability to produce a normal amount of inflammation. And it also increases the amount of cytokines produced that cause a greater amount of inflammation in the body. So think of it this way. The body starts to add body fat. That body fat itself begins to create inflammatory cytokines, as well as a higher production potentially of cortisol, not always, but sometimes, and definitely a higher production of estrogen. And estrogen can lead to higher amounts of inflammation as well, especially when not kept in check with progesterone. So everything has a balancing act in the body. We think of it as almost like scales, a left and a right side to the scale. You need to keep them balanced. So adipocytes, or fat cells they're called, can create more cytokines, which can cause more inflammation in the body, which can then suppress the white blood cells in the immune system. So although I don't think that this is the best time if you are potentially immunocompromised or you are worried about getting the virus that is going around, what I say is this. If not now, very shortly when all of this ends, let's say in this summer, which it will, this is the time to get down to a healthy weight. Now, a healthy weight does not mean that you need to see your abs. That's not what a healthy weight means. What a healthy weight means is that you have a good BMI between about 19 and 24. The range does go from just about 19 to 24.9, but ideally 19 to 24. And that you're only about 10 pounds, maybe 15 pounds maximum, away from your ideal weight at all times. So sure, it's not easy to always maintain the same weight, but I think most people should be able to stay within about, let's say 5% of their ideal body weight. So that gives you a little bit of leeway, maybe in the wintertime, you're 5 to 10 pounds heavier, and maybe in the summertime, you're 5 to 10 pounds less. I think that's perfectly acceptable for most people, and I actually don't think that's necessarily very unhealthy as well. Big fluctuations are not healthy, and also people getting too low in body fat, especially women, can actually be more damaging. So what I would say is stay within 10 pounds of your ideal body weight, ideally 5 pounds if possible, and that just allows for some normal fluctuation in water retention as well. Okay, number 3 is this, but again, do lose the body weight. I'm telling you right now, almost nothing is healthier for people than if you're 50 pounds overweight to lose 40 of that 50 pounds. And that's the truth. A lot of people don't want to talk about that because they're afraid of saying it, but I come from it from a health-based perspective. This is not vanity at all. I'm not talking about that. What I'm saying is, if you want a healthier immune system, if you want less of a chance of all-cause mortality, cancer, high blood pressure, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, all forms of metabolic syndrome, or that is metabolic syndrome, then you need to be at the lowest possible weight, which is healthy for your body. It does not mean lose too much weight. It doesn't mean become too thin at all. What it means is get a healthy body weight for you. I'm not saying you should be a 19 on a BMI. That's more for the Vata body type. A very healthy BMI for an endomorph body type or a Kapha body type would be a 23 or 24 on that BMI, and that's totally fine, right? Use the waist-hip ratio, use BMI, use a healthy body fat. All of those matter, all right? Super, super important. And again, this is always about health, not about losing weight. All right, so the stress part is this. Number 3 is this. A third way that white blood cells or the immune system become suppressed is when the body begins to perceive stress. And I know many of us are stressed right now. So here's what happens though. The brain receives a message that you're living in a fearful or anxious or overwhelmed or stressful based life situation. So the body begins to produce more stress-based hormones. And that happens by the hypothalamus inside the brain telling the pituitary gland, their glands, inside of the brain to produce hormones stimulating hormones that produce stress hormones from the adrenals. And those would be norepinephrine, they would be mineralocorticoids like aldosterone, and they would be glucocorticoids such as cortisol. And again, you don't need to know what any of these mean, but basically what it does is this. It increases blood pressure, it can increase heart rate, it constricts blood flow, it gets the body ready for fight or flight. And it does that by also releasing glucose that's naturally stored inside of our liver and or muscles, and it releases it into the bloodstream. So it raises your blood sugar endogenously. Now it raises your blood sugar, believe it or not, without you even eating any carbohydrates, which is why so many people in the health and fitness field have to understand that stress and cortisol can actually cause body fat without even eating carbohydrates. And for a really detailed explanation of this, I would love you to go to stephencabral.com/BRMI. So that's stephencabral.com/BRMI. And that's a video that I did for the Bioregulatory Medicine Institute that was for doctors and regular people alike. So you can check that out. I put the PDFs, I put the slides right there. There's all sorts of items on that presentation. So feel free to check that out for a really in-depth view of how cortisol, when it increases, it brings blood sugar in the bloodstream. It can increase insulin. When insulin gets increased, it increases inflammation and actually suppresses lymphatic or lymphocytes. And it also suppresses the secretion of mucus, which contains what's called secretory IgA cells. And that's our first line of defense in case you touch your eyes, touch your nose, touch your mouth, or inhale any of these viruses, bacteria, etc. So super important to understand is that stress actually lowers immunity. All right, number 4 is this. Number 4 is alcohol. And I added this in, and I know it's not going to be popular, but alcohol is damaging to the immune system. And it does it for a couple reasons. And this is it's overlooked. One is when you consume alcohol, you're depleting your body of vital reserves. So you're depleting of magnesium and electrolytes, and it's depleting your body of B vitamins and zinc and vitamin C. So that's really important to look at it, is that alcohol is also depleting your body of what your immune system needs. One thing we want to really understand and look at as well is that when alcohol is consumed, it actually starts to get absorbed right through your stomach into your bloodstream immediately. So a lot of people talk about the effects of alcohol the next day on actually lowering blood sugar, and that's true. A lot of people can get what's called reactive hypoglycemia, to drinking alcohol. But what happens is initially you get a surge of neurotransmitters such as dopamine, and you actually get a increase in blood sugar typically when consuming alcohol within the half hour or so of consuming it. So it has a couple different effects. It's excitatory in the beginning typically, and then it becomes a central nervous system depressant and actually can cause hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar the next morning and actually throughout the night. It's why a lot of people who consume alcohol don't actually get into a deeper level of sleep. So although they might be in bed, they might fall asleep quickly and be in bed for 8 hours or so, they don't actually get that hour and a half of deep sleep, which is why they don't feel rejuvenated the next day, and they might have to even stay in bed even longer. So it's often overlooked. I want to talk more about alcohol and its effects in the body in the future, but we won't be going over that today. Now, one thing alcohol also is that it begins to, well, besides lowering the white blood cells that we spoke about, it begins to clump together red blood cells. We call that red blood cell rouleau. When I look under a microscope and I look at someone's blood, I can see a clumping together of red blood cells. So it's called agglutination, or the actual scientific term would be red blood cell rouleau. And when this happens, it reduces the blood flow, it reduces the oxygen to the tissues of the body. So you can actually, now again, the pH of the blood will always remain constant, but you can actually get a lower pH of the tissues when consuming alcohol. So it's interesting to look at, and again, viruses thrive more in a lower pH-based environment. That's been clinically proven. Okay, number 5 is this, lack of sleep. So a lack of sleep does a number of things in the body. So when we don't get enough sleep, we don't begin to rejuvenate as well. We don't detoxify as well. Remember, the majority of deep sleep and the majority of detoxification will take place typically between 10 p.m. and about 2 a.m. in the morning. Those are the most critical hours. So the more hours before midnight really does matter. Now, you could train your body, you could use blackout shades, you can do a lot of things to get deeper sleep whenever you go to bed. There's no doubt about that. That can happen. But the most natural way to get deep sleep, to lower cortisol naturally, and to raise melatonin naturally, is to go to bed a couple hours maximum after the sun sets. That's natural. So that would mean that if the sun is setting at 7 o'clock or so, well, it would be natural to go to bed about 9 o'clock or so at night. Now, I know most of us don't go to bed that early. I struggle to go to bed that early. I've never enjoyed going to bed early. And I used to like going to bed between midnight and 1 a.m. That was my favorite time to go to bed. But I've realized that in order to be my healthiest self, that I do need to go to bed between 9:30 and 10 p.m. It would be great to go to bed a little bit earlier, but that's just not going to work out for me. So between 9:30 and 10 p.m., we do see a drop at cortisol at its lowest point, typically at 9:30 p.m. naturally. That will change a little bit with the seasons, but still good enough for our conversation today, somewhere between 9 and 10 p.m. A little bit earlier in the wintertime, a little bit later in the summer. That works seasonally, and Ayurveda has taught us that as well. Now, if we get a lack of sleep, though, that means, let's say we don't get our, on average, 8 hours a night, somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. But again, it's not just the number of hours, it's the deep sleep and REM, and I'll be talking about that in the future as well. You definitely want an hour and a half of each of those minimum per night, with more REM than deep sleep. Okay, so what happens if you don't get that? Well, you start to lose your balance of what are called T helper cells in your overall white blood cell based production, especially if stress hormones don't decrease. Because again, if you're not sleeping, then you don't get that boost in melatonin, so you're not going to get the reduction as much in stress hormones. What affects sleep? Well, alcohol affects sleep, caffeine affects sleep, stress, exercise helps actually balance it. So exercise earlier in the day will help you sleep better at night. A walk after dinner, a calm walk after dinner will help you sleep better at night. Too much exercise, too close to bedtime could keep you up. So really important to look at all of those particular factors. All right, number 6 is this, food sensitivities. Who would think that food sensitivities, like a sensitivity to gluten or dairy or even avocados, would cause a decrease in immune system function? Well, the problem is this. If you eat a food that you're sensitive to, remember, not all foods that you're sensitive to cause bloating, gas, and indigestion. And I would actually say most of those foods aren't necessarily food sensitivities per se, but they're digestive-based issues, meaning an inability to handle fructose or fructo, oligo, di, mono, and polysaccharides, right? Some of those FODMAPs. So, or just weak stomach acid. Now you can't digest animal proteins or fish or anything like that. So there's food sensitivities in general and weak digestion. But what I would say is there's a lot of IgG food sensitivities. That means foods that you don't react to right away with hives or headache or low mood or brain fog, but you actually react the next day or the day after with some form of inflammation. And part of that can be immune system dysfunction, and that could be a lowering of the immune system. So, for example, a lot of times when people eat gluten, which is a typical food sensitivity, no real reactions when they eat it, but the next day, a little bit more lethargy, not as great as sleep, or they could show skin rashes, headaches, brain fog, autoimmune-based issues, because over time that inflammation adds up. Remember, if you just eat a little bit of gluten every day, well, that inflammation is kind of always there. Same with alcohol. If you combine alcohol with gluten, believe it or not, there can be inflammation for up to 31 hours. That's more than one full day. So if every night you're having a little bread, a little alcohol, well, the inflammation can continue to compound. Well, as it compounds over time, that's when we get the inflammation, what's called Th1 or Th2 imbalances. Now, most people will trend one way or the other, and I'm going to talk about that next. So, long-standing inflammation in the gut can lead to this next thing, which is number 7, intestinal permeability. Sure, it can be caused by antibiotics, it can be caused by birth control, it can be caused by poor food combining, it can be caused by alcohol, stress, toxins, and that increases the gaps, the small intestinal gaps, inside of the intestinal lumen, which is basically the skin of the intestines. It's a single cell. It's not very thick, but it's what separates the things that you don't want in your body from your bloodstream, right? So it's single cell. It's meant to be tight enough to only allow the sugars, the fatty acids, and the amino acids through. So here's the issue, though, is that if the permeability increases, we have now bacteria, we have lipopolysaccharides, we have toxins, we have yeast, we have larger amino acid strands, all entering the bloodstream, or all entering the GALT, which is called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. Now, what happens here is the immune system see these foreign invaders that are supposed to be the outside of our body, which is inside of our intestines. It's basically a protective tube from your mouth all the way out through the backside of your body when you have a bowel movement, right? So that's supposed to be the outside of the body. Only the good stuff gets in. Well, when you have intestinal permeability, it allows now bacteria or other toxins to enter the body. The immune system becomes active, and when this happens on a daily basis, if you eat 3 times a day and this is permeable throughout the day, well, it leads to chronic immune elevation. This is what leads to 90% of our autoimmune conditions and many of the skin conditions, headaches, brain fog, migraines, fatigue that many people suffer from. That is why, when in doubt, you always look at the gut. You say, what is going on with my gut that might be leading to these chronic, long-standing conditions? And I'm not saying that it's always the gut, but in a lot of cases, it is. And it's at least one of the causal factors. So over time, though, if you have a chronically elevated immune system, over time, the signaling begins to deafen. So you stop responding to some of these food sensitivities. You stop responding to certain immune-based elevations. Your secretory IgA, which was once really high, can actually become a 0. So when I got Addison's disease, my secretory IgA was not registering. I was not producing those immunoglobulin A cells. That's a problem. So my first line of defense was down. So you could see why I was sick every 2 weeks. And I was on antibiotics all the time because I caught every bacteria. I caught every virus that was around me because my first line of defense was gone. There was basically no wall. There was no front door to my house. That was it. It let everything in. The windows were always open. So part of the way that you get well if you're really sick is that you have to start to look at multiple factors. The gut, toxins, heavy metals, food sensitivities. You have to look at it all. That's why people ask me, like, what's the thing I should do for migraines? And I say, I don't know. I could give you all of the reasons why. I do know there's about a dozen reasons. And that goes for most issues. There's about a dozen. I can't tell you the one right off the bat because I need to see what it is on a lab that can pinpoint it. And if the person's not able to do labs, I say, okay, here's what we're going to begin to do. We're going to do the 21-day detox. We're going to begin to do daily foundational protocol. We're going to do a true elimination diet. We're going to do all of the things as if you had all of the things. Because how do we know, right? You can't ask your doctor or functional medicine practitioner or integrative health practitioner to guess. Now, what they can do, though, is they can give you protocols that work based on the dozen symptoms that lead to migraines, autoimmune, etc. I mean, a dozen imbalances, I should say. Or you can begin to pinpoint it. Is it too high a levels of omega-6s to omega-3s? Is it too high a level of copper to zinc? Is it too high a level of calcium to magnesium? Right? These are all common imbalances. Or is it gut permeability? Or is it mercury or aluminum? Or is it cadmium? Right? Like, what is it? And again, you can test for all of these things. So the nice thing is that we know how to figure them out. The bad thing is they're not cured overnight, right? We're not curing disease. That's because we're fixing underlying root cause imbalances. Now, if you were to go on a pharmaceutical drug, you could lower your blood pressure within a week. You could lower your cholesterol within a week. But what does that really do? Did it fix any of the underlying imbalances? It did not. You could take migraine medication. Did it fix what caused the migraines? It didn't. So that's why you have to understand is that natural health is the answer. It's the only answer if you don't want to mask symptoms, but it's not going to be fixed overnight. And that's okay. Because what you can do is you can begin to correct those things, and your symptoms actually guide the way. They tell you, am I on the right path or am I not? Do I need to course correct, or should I continue following this healing protocol because I'm beginning to see a little bit of improvement each and every week? And each and every week compounds. So then after 12 to 16 weeks, you're feeling 80+% better. And for most people, they are ecstatic at that. And then all you need to do is continue to work the process for that last 10 to 20%. So hopefully today's podcast was helpful. These are 7 things that will lower your immune system. It means that we're all going to miss a night's sleep. We're all going to have, pizza or pasta or bread or so every once in a while. We're all going to have alcohol maybe every once in a while. Not everyone, right? But here's the thing. What you want to do is watch how often does this happen? And are you well right now? Because if you're well, you can get away with that once a week. Maybe even twice a week. No big deal. Not back-to-back days, but no big deal. The inflammation will subside. But if you're not well, the 7 things I just named, they really should be corrected until you rebalance the body. When you rebalance the body, you have a lot more flexibility. And then your immune system will naturally be balanced. So hopefully today's podcast was helpful. As always, please let me know what you thought. And if it was helpful, please do feel free to share this show with anyone you believe it could serve. I want to sincerely thank you for your support of this podcast. I couldn't do it without you, and I mean that. I truly do. I also want to make sure you knew that we now have multiple ways for you to find your answers to the most difficult health, wellness, weight loss, and anti-aging questions. You can find podcast-specific topics like thyroid, adrenal, hormones, sleep, digestion, Ayurveda, and many more at stevencabral.com/podcasts that will then link you to your favorite Apple, Spotify, and other podcast players. Plus, all new podcasts and weekly exclusive video content is being added to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Stephen Cabral. And that's Stephen with a PH. Head on over and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the exclusive content. Lastly, if you've ever found any of my podcasts or books to be helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a review on iTunes or your favorite media player for the podcast. Rating and subscribing to the YouTube and podcast allow me to reach more and more people and help spread my mission of healing throughout the world. Thank you again for being a part of this movement.